2. Welcome back at WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is Pittsburgh week around here, and not just any Pittsburgh week, Luke Jones. It is a Pittsburgh week on the backside of a drubbing at home at the hands of the Cleveland Browns. Welcome to Pittsburgh. Off we go, right? And Tim Williams gets cut, and the Washington Nationals have made the NLDS. It's dogs and cats, all of that stuff going on, huh?
Yeah, and you say it's Pittsburgh week, but what kind of Pittsburgh week is this? I have a trivia question for you.
Oh, boy, here we go.
And
Bart Scott, Jared Johnson. No, Anquan Bolden.
Yeah. So my trivia question for you is, Sunday, of course, is going to be the first time in quite some time that Ravens-Steelers play with no Terrell Suggs, no Ben Roethlisberger, no Joe Flacco, and let's even throw Antonio Brown in there for history's sake. When was the last time the Ravens played the Steelers without any of those mentioned individuals being involved?
Well, Roethlisberger would have come along in like 4, right? 4 or 5. So
2004.
Suggs was 3. So he would have played in the 3. So 2, I guess, right?
Yeah. The quarterbacks that day.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, you're right. Those guys I mentioned, at least one of them had played in every single Ravens-Steelers game since then, but you go back to the end of the 2002 season, Jeff Blake against Tommy Maddox in Pittsburgh.
Touchdown Tommy. I remember touchdown Tommy.
Yeah. I remember Jeff Blake palling around with Bill Cowher after the game. I remember to the chagrin of many Ravens fans. But
I'll ask Charlie Batch this week if he remembers it. He remembers everything.
But it just really speaks to how much things have changed, and now we're talking about the first time Lamar Jackson is going to make a start and play meaningful snaps against the Steelers. Mason Rudolph on the other side. Ravens kind of reeling after 2 straight losses. Pittsburgh getting their first win of the season on Monday night, where, okay, they played well, but, boy, the Bengals look awful.
Oh.
We'll talk about that next week plenty, but this is a really different kind of Ravens-Steelers, and probably have to go back to 2015, and I remember in that game, Flacco played Mike Vick early in the season, that Thursday night game, and then it was Ryan Mallett against the Steelers late in the season in Baltimore. So we're definitely entering some uncharted territory here, or at least some territory we're not used to here with Ravens-Steelers.
All right, well, the Tim Williams thing, we've talked so much about the draft, and we can give Eric DeCosta praise and damnation in equal parts, right, for whatever's right and whatever's wrong, and throw Ozzie in there as well, and how shrewd they were about using a first-round pick to get a quarterback who can now play, and the other players that they've drafted. I mean, I don't – it is a hit-or-miss sort of business, right, when you look back over the Sergio Kindles and whatnot. Hey, I was, at the park this week in the Fantennial Park, and I saw a litany of wide receivers. I took a picture with Mark Clayton and Randy Himes and Clarence Moore and just different names that come back, and you say, all right, well, Tim Williams got cut in week 4 after Pittsburgh week. There's a 3rd-round draft pick that didn't make it into year 3.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have those misses. There's no doubt about that. I think in the big picture, you look at every team and you're going to see first-round misses. The Ravens haven't had as many of them, but you'll certainly see misses throughout the draft. And in the Ravens' case, you can find a bunch of guys in the 5th and 6th and 7th round who ended up being real players for them. I mean,
or undrafted guys, for that matter.
Sure. I mean, yeah. But look at Matt Judon. I mean, there's a perfect example of someone who was a 5th-round pick in 2016, and that was the year they drafted Kamale Correa and Bronson Kafusi, and you're thinking those are going to be guys that are going to be a part of their pass rush, a part of their defensive front. And
I saw Correa get a flag for hitting a quarterback late last week, 2 weeks ago. I saw him playing. You always notice the guys that
Sure.
that I watch what John Simon does. Don't ask me why. You know what I mean? But you do see these guys, and they sort of pepper around the league, but. I haven't remembered a Ravens draft pick that really came back and bite him beyond Derek Anderson or whatever 15 years ago, right? For 5 minutes.
I'd throw John Simon in there, but it's not as though John Simon became an all-pro. I mean, he's a guy who's played, he's hung around the league, he's had some success, he's had a lot of injuries too. But I think for me, you mentioned this 2017 draft, and not to rehash this too much because it's ancient history at this point, but we talked so much that year about the Ravens needing to add more to their offense, and that draft started off Marlon Humphrey, which, hey, remember, that was the pick a lot of people scrutinized, and that has clearly worked out really well. But then it was Tyus Bowser, Chris Wormley, Tim Williams. They had 3 picks on day 2 of that draft, and it was all defense. And you look at it, Tyus Bowser, well, he's been mostly a special teams player and backup. And there were people talking on Tuesday after Tim Williams was let go. Fans were saying, well, could Tyus Bowser be next? I'm not speculating about that, but it speaks to the fact that he hasn't done very much for them either. Chris Wormley's been okay. I mean, he's been a guy who's been a decent 5 technique for them, but not a guy who's really moved the meter. And Tim Williams, despite plenty of talent coming out of Alabama, the big question mark about him wasn't his ability. It was much more work ethic, maturity. He had some off-field issues, and I think he's a guy who flashed a little bit here and there during the preseason, and you'd say, okay, is this going to be the year he breaks through? And just never showed anything with any semblance of consistency. So I think that's where you look back at that draft philosophically and say, well, that was a year they needed offensive help based on how they looked the previous season, and they loaded up on all these defensive guys, and, well, one of them's gone already at a position that is clearly a concern right now, a position that is clearly a need right now.
Yeah, they didn't cut him because of their deep depth. I mean, they cut him because he was below the bar, right? Literally, right?
Right. This was the opposite. I mean, a little over a week ago, John Harbaugh was challenging Tyus Bowser and Tim Williams, saying they need to be better. We need to be getting more pressure. We need to be getting more sacks. And he even went on to say they'll probably tell you they need more reps. I would say earn more reps by doing something about it. Well, Tim Williams went from 30 snaps in week 2 to 15 in week 3 to 7 in Sunday's loss to Cleveland. So it really speaks to him falling out of favor. And I think we talked about this a few days ago. When you give up 40 points and over 500 yards to the Cleveland Browns, and it's the second straight game you've given up over 500 yards, we talked about the possibility of a message being sent.
Well, the history was that, right? Like, literally. I mean, it was the first thing you said after the game. You're like, these are the kinds of games where Harbaugh's going to cut somebody on Tuesday. And he did.
Yeah, and I even went back and looked at it, and I think I mentioned at the time, it was after that Pittsburgh game, that Sunday night Pittsburgh game in 2014. I think Roethlisberger threw 6 touchdowns. 2 days later, they cut Shockey Brown and Dominique Franks. 2015, that was the, I believe, only other time Harbaugh's lost to the Browns in Baltimore. That was the game Josh McCown threw for over 350 yards while they cut Jason Babin, remember the pass rusher they brought in when Suggs got popped his Achilles in week 1 that year, and Rashawn Melvin of that famous playoff loss to New England. He did hang around for a few games the following season.
He tried hard.
So, yeah, and he's someone who's managed to hang around in the league with some mixed success, modest success at times. But there was precedent for this, and I think it was just a case of they clearly need to shake some things up. Clearly, they were working out some linebackers, and I would expect the bottom of that roster to be fluid. They added L.J. Fort at the beginning of the week, a veteran linebacker who's played a little bit on defense, mostly a special teams player for Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. But I think we're going to see some moves like this, and I don't think they're necessarily done. I don't know if they're going to find anyone that they're going to strike gold with or, say, a diamond in the rough that can help them, but you got to try. You can't just sit back and do nothing if you have guys who, in your opinion, are playing and contributing to a level below the bar. And they have too many guys like that right now. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. So Tim Williams is one of what could have been a few guys at any different spot on the field.
Who are underperforming, literally, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't give up over 1,000 yards and, 73 points over the last 2 weeks without having a number of guys performing below expectation. And really, I mean, we talked about this after Sunday's loss. Who could you say this past week played well on defense? I mean, Marlon Humphrey, individually against Odell Beckham, but even Humphrey admitted to a coverage bust on the one Ricky Seals-Jones long catch and run. So the issues run deep, and I'm not at all surprised to see the Ravens, at the very least, send a message here, but also hoping they can find somebody, whether it's on the street or maybe a trade. Not saying a miracle kind of acquisition, but maybe find an individual or two who can give them a little bit of a boost.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore. Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. I am Nasty at WNST.net. Appreciate all of our sponsors around here, including our friends at Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy. Bill Cole going to join us here this week as we head off to Pittsburgh. I busted out the Pizza John's hat because I drank my purple drink, my purple energy drink that didn't help at all on Sunday, out of my Pizza John's cup, so it's off the set. Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast, and tasty fried chicken that you know about, and the Western fries. Make sure you're using your Rofo app. Also want to say hello to Sydney out there. Thanks for fixing my wife's wedding ring and getting it all set up and doing the things that jewelers do. They've been doing it there for a long, long time. Charles Newsonoff and Sons. Go see Sydney. You can see him off the side of the highway at 695 as well. We are taking 695 to 70 and through Breezewood and Somerset and heading on up with Yins and Nat to Pittsburgh on Sunday for a very, very weird, rare. Luke, I don't know. Have you ever seen a game in daylight in Pittsburgh? I'm wondering.
2013. That's the last time the Ravens played in Pittsburgh that it wasn't nationally televised. If you think back to that Christmas Day game, that was technically a 4:15, 4:30 kind of start. But so that wasn't truly prime time, but it kind of was because everyone was gathered with families or family and friends and watching that one. But yeah, this is definitely some strange territory, and I'd say probably the networks are happy that they're not getting another Mason Rudolph-led Steelers team in primetime. Although, give them credit for what they did Monday night against what looks to be an absolutely nightmare of a Bengals team at this point. But Rudolph looked better. I think still someone who much more apt to throwing underneath, and we'll see how the Ravens handle that. And let's face it, I mean, you can pile on the Steelers all you want, and they started 0-3, and we know what the history is there of teams that start 0-3.
And they only won because they played the Bengals the other night. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think they played well, but again, it's kind of like looking at the Ravens against the Dolphins. What do you really take away from it other than, hey, they beat the pants off a really, really bad football team? So does it mean Pittsburgh made a breakthrough? Well, we see where the Ravens are a few weeks after playing the Dolphins. I mean, I don't know if it's anything to draw conclusions off of other than the fact that they do have a young quarterback who does have some talent, and he did play a pretty good football game, albeit with a game plan that you could really see they were trying to protect him. I mean, they ran some wildcat kind of plays, and he was throwing underneath a lot of his passes behind the line of scrimmage, but they were able to make plays, and they were able to do enough to run away from the Cincinnati Bengals, who look just hopeless at this point. So how does that translate against a defense that, let's call a spade, has been bad? I mean, it's a bottom 10 defense, 27th in total defense, 30th against the pass, 23rd in points allowed. They're okay on third down at 11th, but a lot of that has to do with, offenses haven't even gotten to third down against them because they don't need to because they're giving up big plays. They're 22nd in the red zone. So you have a bad defense going on the road against a team with some talent, but certainly not as much talent on the offensive side of the ball as you're akin to seeing in Pittsburgh.
Well, it used to be a matchup issue. Every single game. Eric DeCosta spent the whole off season and reading your blogs for 5 years, right? Like trying to figure out how we're going to match up with three guys that we don't have guys to match up with, right? Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, huge matchup issues.